Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hello. I'm Judy Barr, Vice President of the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust, our nonprofit land trust here in Wellesley, private nonprofit land trust. And we are doing, for our spring lecture this year, we're doing a panel. And I want to give you a little background of the panel and then also share something that a citizen of Wellesley emailed me today during the day that I think will be interesting as we go forward. First of all, just last year, in 2023, the National Land Trust Alliance brought together conservation groups and affordable housing advocates to explore new collaborations. This led to a white paper, Finding Common Ground, and was followed by Breaking Ground, an affordable housing resource guide for land trusts. So the land trusts in this country are starting to dig in and help the community housing crisis. In March of last year, 2023, all members of the Wellesley Conservation Board of Directors attended the annual meeting of the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition, the organization of about 140 private land trusts within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Its theme was affordable housing and land conservation, not an either-or, hence the title that we have heavily borrowed for our panel discussion today. As we were planning our spring lecture, two Venn diagrams began to intersect. One, how land trust had collaborated with affordable housing to create win-win projects that we heard about from three of these gentlemen and more that are sitting in front of us, hence they were invited to visit us here in Wellesley. And two, the need for different approaches that might be used and might have been used in the three housing projects that were proposed in Wellesley this year that ran into some opposition of various degrees. But anyway, so this led to the panel idea. Invite speakers we had heard, a land trust conservation director, a community housing advocate, and a planner who brought these groups together, and ask them to present projects that might inform some future planning and decisions in Wellesley. Three respondents from Wellesley will then reply to those comments. So that's why you're here tonight, and many more are zooming in. The session is being recorded and will be available on the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust website later this week. We hope this forum will lead to more public cross-town discussions of these important issues. And what was shared with me today was a citizen of Wellesley saying, I hope you do more of these, that we have things that are so siloed that we don't have the opportunity to talk across different units of town government. And perhaps a non-governmental organization like a nonprofit land trust can be a bridge that can get these conversations started. So that's our seed crystal hope that we hope will happen. And to get us started, I'm so glad to be able to introduce our panel's moderator. For 28 years, Heather Zaleski has been the Chief Counsel and Strategic Planner for Fox Hill Village homeowners. In Wellesley, she served as town moderator for 7 years, chair of the advisory committee, and the chair of the senior review committee. Heather is a graduate of Smith College, Northeastern University School of Law, and Harvard School of Public Health, where she earned her master's in health policy. So I think we're in for a very informative evening. There will be time at the end for questions from the audience. Heather, thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to give you a little bit of a roadmap of tonight's presentation. You're going to hear from three specialists that were just described to you. Each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes to make a presentation. And following those presentations, there will be an opportunity for some responses from people in town government, and the council, the Conservation Land Trust. And then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So to start, I'd like to give you a little more information about each of the presenters tonight. First, you'll hear from Mark Walmsley, who's the Conservation Director at Kestrel Land Trust that protects 27,000 acres of land in the Pioneer Valley. Kestrel's current project combines housing, conservation, and affordable housing. Mark's been with Kestrel for 9 years. Prior to that, he held positions at the Trustees of the Reservation in the western region of the state. He holds a BA in Cultural Anthropology from SUNY, a Master's in Applied Anthropology from the University of Maryland, and a Master's in Landscape Architect from UMass Amherst. The second presenter is Rich Feely. Rich is the president of the Concord Housing Foundation, a nonprofit 501c3 corporation dedicated to community outreach, education, and fundraising for affordable housing. He's also a member of the Town Task Force advising the Concord Select Board on the possible acquisition and use of Superfund site in West Concord. Frank graduated from Princeton University's program in Public and International Affairs and from Yale Law School. He is now retired after a career in public service and teaching and consulting at the Boston University School of Public Health. Our third presenter is Peter Flinker. Peter is the president of Dodson & Flinker, a landscape architecture and planning firm based in Northampton. He joined the firm in 1987, when it was then Dodson Associates. After receiving a master's in landscape architecture from UMass Amherst, he became a principal within the firm. The firm specializes in planning for smart growth and sustainable development and pursues projects that throughout the Northeast. He was elected a Fellow of the American Society for Landscape Architects in 2017, and in 2020, he was made a Fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Mark Walmsley to come up and make his presentation.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you to the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust for inviting us all here tonight, and thank you, all of you, for joining us, both in person and online, and choosing us over the Celtics game and other distractions that are out there. We really appreciate having you here. So being the first presenter, I'm also the guinea pig for AV, I was told, so hopefully it all goes smoothly. I wanted to start out with a caveat. Again, as they pointed out, my name is Mark Walmsley. I am the Conservation Director at Kestrel Land Trust. We are a regional land trust out in the Connecticut River Valley. And my caveat is I'm really here with one story to tell, and that's about one particular project that we call Green East Hampton. We feel it's innovative, and we're particularly proud of it. We've been working on it for the last 4 years now. And the specifics of that project may or may not be relevant to Wellesley. We'll find out through the discussion tonight. But it's my hope that the inspirational and aspirational nature of the project will resonate in many communities. And certainly that the lessons learned will be could be universally applied. So anyway, to get us underway, as I mentioned, we are a generalist land trust. We do lots of types of work. We're a professionally staffed land trust. We work with habitat protection, farmland protection, parks and open space, drinking water protection. We have around 30 projects going at any time during the year if you catch us on the phone. And for this particular project, Green East Hampton, we're working with another nonprofit, a nonprofit housing group called the Community Builders. They are a nationwide nonprofit. We were luckily enough to have an office in Northampton, very close to ours in Amherst. So why and how did Kestrel get involved with conservation and housing? There were a number of realizations that hit us. I think any of us who's concerned about anything realize that we're facing a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and a housing crisis all at the same time. And communities really don't have the option to just choose one of those and not deal with the other. So we realized, there could be things gained by trying to address all of them together. What could we come if we focus all of them and see, how we can put the minds of the room and the expertise to kind of consider them, how can we address them? We've been working, as what most land trusts are across the country right now, to be more equitable in our land access and the shared benefits from our conservation projects across the community. I think a lot of us have been a lot more introspective in the last few years. Who are we serving? Are we serving them well? Is that equitable? And, there's kind of a fact that a lot of land trusts have also been dealing with, is that there is sometimes a relationship between land conservation and housing prices and land scarcity. People often know that houses next to conservation land often sell for more than houses otherwise. It's an amenity. It's a great amenity to have, but there's an unintended consequence there that we would be well to address. And I think we also started realizing there's an opportunity for practical partnerships between multiple benefits, again, when we address all of the different crises mentioned at the top there. This is not necessarily a new idea. Although I feel our project is innovative, this has been going on in various scales across the country. And as Judy mentioned, there have been various publications that have come out recently dealing with this. I have to point out the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board has been in existence for quite a long time in the state of Vermont, who's been dealing with these together. So again, not a new thing, just kind of different scales. So how did Growing Green East Hampton start? Well, it really started with 2 anonymous donations, significant amount of money, and it came with a vision. This individual came to us and said, can you find parcels in the city of East Hampton, which we can talk about in a moment, where you could conserve a significant amount of land and build affordable housing? As I said, it was focused on the city of East Hampton, so why? One reason is the donor was particularly interested in East Hampton, but there are some similarities actually between Wellesley and the city of East Hampton. East Hampton is a little smaller population-wise. It's around 16,000 compared to 29,000 in Wellesley. Similarly small land base, around 13 square miles of land. It's getting pretty densely developed. There isn't that much open space left. Pretty much the only place that I was joking before is kind of sacred is Mount Tom. If people know out there, the city still wants to protect the area around Mount Tom. And I don't know if people know that there's been speculation that the city of East Hampton was actually the inspiration for Whoville in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and that the Grinch used to live on Mount Tom. That has not been confirmed, but I still like the story quite a bit. But it's densely developed. The tide is turning. The town is saying we need more housing. And the land is becoming a lot more expensive, to the point where land trusts can't do the conservation really by themselves. We just can't raise the amount of money that the parcels are worth. And we thought, okay, bringing these together, can we make it practical by bringing the expertise of these 2 groups together, conservation groups and affordable housing groups, definitely with altruistic reasons, caring about housing for the communities as well as all the values that open space brings, and can we do something innovative? So we took this donation, we started off with a feasibility study. We looked at the community's broad goals, we looked at different locations, we met with different partners trying to learn what housing groups were bringing to the table, what were they interested in. We knew how land trusts operated. We had no idea how affordable housing groups operated, and what were their interests, and what is their availability. Do they want to partner with us? So we kind of lucked out, actually, because the city of East Hampton recently completed a housing production plan. And there was overlap in a number of the properties that were in the housing production plan with the city's open space and recreation plan. And we thought, wow, they come right together. The city's conflicted here a little bit. How is this going to work out? It seemed like a great place to try and do both. So you can see here, number of the parcels a couple large parcels remaining left in the town that haven't been developed. We basically started visiting the properties, talking with the landowners, and it turned out that one of them was actively for sale. It had been on the market for a while, and we were able to get that property under contract using the donation. Now, we knew the price was too high, but at least allowed us to start doing the due diligence on the land and figure out how much it was actually worth, as well as how much the conservation groups could bring to the table and the housing groups could bring to the table. So this is the property we settled on, 385 Main Street. It's 53 acres. It's pretty close to the center of town and towards the Williston Northampton School, which is kind of right over here in this area. It's a mix of open meadows and forest land. Really beautiful views of two kind of local mountains, including Mount Tom, down here in the lower right-hand corner. It has conservation land surrounding it. It's like, wow, okay, so we can build on already conserved land. And it's on the Manhan River, which is a pretty important tributary to the Connecticut River. So it's checking a lot of conservation boxes. It jumped out at us right away. We do a lot of mapping to evaluate potential projects. It's mapped as important species habitat. It has good farmland soils. It's attractive to go, it's an inspiring place. These are along the Manhans and in the woodlands. So one of the first things we did was we said, well, okay, if this property just sold on the open market, what could it become? And we engaged a firm to do a build out on current zoning. And we were kind of shocked because there's a lot of wetlands on the properties, but they still came out with this as being allowable. We checked it with the city planner. 35 single-family units spread across 53 acres, pushing right through the open meadows, right into the woodlands, right up to the edge of the river. And we said, you know what? Not many people in town are going to like that. The neighbors aren't going to like that. The town's not going to like that. So that was kind of a good thing to kind of have in our back pocket. And I told the designer, I was like, give me something realistic. Nothing pie in the sky. What do you think could actually be built? And this is what they came up with. So with all that in mind, we conceived our projects. Basically, the partnership between Kestrel and the community builders to advance this joint land conservation housing project, we focused on trying to preserve 40 or more acres of the 53-acre property. Expected conservation uses, passive recreation, wildlife habitat, wetland protection. We hope to have some active agriculture there for the new community that's going to form on the site of community garden or farm. We were able to bring money together from both, again, the conservation community and the affordable housing programs that are out there. And the housing plan is to be constructing 87 new energy efficient apartments in 3 buildings on 10 acres. Mix of studio to 3-bedroom. They're also, the Affordable Housing Group actually owns the property next door with an elderly facility, which they're going to be rehabbing as part of it. It's going to be 100% affordable, with a range from extremely low income to workforce housing and built to very, very high energy standards, both passive and with green energy. So basically, this is how the parcel is going to be broken up. The housing parcel you can see right down there on 10 acres. There's going to be a long entryway out to the conservation parcel with pretty much a lovely walk there. We might even put eventually a farm stand up here along the road. And this is what the footprint of the housing is going to look like. So again, pretty dense and pretty centrally located along that frontage. And we are going to be intertwining a number of, you don't even have all the paths here, accessible paths through the housing complexes out to the walking trails on the conservation land. Just a little bit of a close-up of the layout. And I should say, so this is going to be a 40B project. For those who know 40B, this is a friendly 40B with the city. So basically, this allows them to build more densely than current zoning, specifically for affordable housing if you don't reach a certain threshold. City of East Hampton is at 7%, so we can still go for a 40B. But we have been working closely with the city on this right from the beginning, as well as the housing groups, as well as all the environmental and land conservation groups. to make sure they were on board. We've been consulting them throughout the process from the beginning to know that this is pretty much the best option for the site. And we think it's the best option for the landowner too, in terms of the amount of money they could receive, from selling their land. These just came in. We just submitted the 40B application last week. So here is just a few graphics of the buildings. I was less involved with this, but it was interesting sitting in on their design. A lot of great thought put into it. And I love these pictures, these renderings. This is what we believe it's going to look like in the end. Again, a new neighborhood, a multi-generational neighborhood that's going to be developed and coordinated with the conservation land as we work with that. I see 3 minutes there. Okay, so a few more pictures. Just really quickly. Again, we've worked with communities pretty closely. We've gotten some great press, including national press and Audubon Magazine for the project. So lessons learned. It's one thing we were asked to bring out tonight. Mutual respect for organizations and their goals, realizing that housing and land conservation are both public goods. Why are we preventing each other from actually achieving our goals when we can work together? Like I mentioned, collaborating from the start increases understanding and trust between different sectors and organizations that haven't worked before, and it certainly allows for more creative and integrated project outcome. As I mentioned again, cross-pollinating community support, we think increases our chance for success, knock on wood. We combine the funding sources from 2 different sectors, which is both an opportunity and a really big challenge, putting together systems and processes that haven't worked together before, all with their own timelines and deadlines. That's been fun, but it's also made a lot of things possible. And even lastly, even with transparency between partners, misunderstandings will happen. We're coming from different angles and with different expertise, but ultimately we think the rewards will outweigh the risks. So thank you very much again for coming out. Turn it over to our next presenter.
Next will be Rich Feely from the Concord Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to describe a project to you that's a little further than Mark's, but not yet in the ground. And as I go, I'm going to explain some of the rationale behind why we have what we have here, and also a bit of the history that I think made it possible in Concord. So anybody here know the Assabet River at all? It is a wild and scenic river. And this piece of property is very close to downtown West Concord right here. It's on the rail trail that used to be the old rail line between Lowell and Framingham. And it is a 5 to 6 minute walk across a lovely bridge over the Assabet River to the train station in West Concord. So very desirable, obviously, from a housing point of view, but also very desirable. There we go. From a conservation point of view, because you can see as the Assabet River swings through here, much of the riverbank in both sides is conserved, and our parcel, this one here, will continue that. And this is high land right here and had already been essentially used as a community trail, although the whole property was in private hands. This gives you a view over the river, and you can see here, there's a little house down here. That's actually 2 affordable units. And we, as housing advocates, we never questioned saving this, but we wanted 10 to 12 units, including saving these 2. The neighborhood, all single-family homes, guess how they felt about 10 or 12 more units. So there was much back and forth as both the conservation people and the housing advocates looked at this parcel. Fortunately, we had a very public-spirited owner who had to maximize value. They couldn't give us a discretionary price because it was a trust, but they were willing to wait for the town to put the deal together. So we looked at various options. But first, let me show you, this looks like a scrum of organizations, and in a way, it is. This is us. We're the nonprofit. We raise a modest amount of money, not as much as our friends in the Conservation Trust and the Sudbury Valley Trustees. We have a town-chartered developer, the Concord Housing Development Trust Corporation, and we now have a municipal affordable housing trust. And you'll see when I get to the money that that's extremely important, because we have a source of money, as long as it's replenished, which doesn't have to wait all the time for town meeting. There's a history in town of opposition initially between conservation. Those of you who know Concord know we have a lot of beautiful conservation land. And before my time, an agreement was negotiated with the town that when it considers buying land, it has to consider both housing and open space / recreational uses. So about 10 years ago, a family that ran a farm not too far from the prison, actually, principal died, went on the market. The town bought the land, and housing funding was used to rehab the farmhouse. So now the two young families who actually run the farm live here. And let me tell you, they couldn't live in Concord if they didn't live there, because running an organic farm is not all that profitable. This is the house I told you about that is actually 2 affordable units. The asking price was about $2.8 million for 7 acres. And the question is, how do we split this between conservation and housing? And as you'll see in a minute, housing has less money than conservation, and frankly, less leverage to raise it in the private sector. So we had to consider what we could get and what we wanted. The first problem was what we'd get if we did nothing. You would get, pardon the expression, 6 or 7 McMansions, because this was all zoned single family, and our little house down here would be gonzo and would be another big house. So, that was kind of unacceptable to all of us. Maybe the neighborhood would have liked it. What we would have liked as housing is to see this part conserved, but this part made 10 or 12 affordable units. Well, the neighborhood got up in arms. Oh, traffic, what are we going to do? So we compromised. And we came up with a package that gives us 3 units on that 1 acre parcel, and the rest is conservation. And I think it's important to take a minute and look at how this money was divided up. So we had CPA money out of both pockets. Everybody knows what CPA is, I assume. We got $300,000 from the housing pocket, $700,000 from the land pocket. The trust had money because we had a sizable affordable housing project that had failed, and that's another whole story. So the trust had money to put into it. We put money in, and we were actually the first ones, the Housing Foundation. We said, we'll put $100,000 into this if you can make it happen. And I like to think that that catalyzed some of the others. But as you can see, the more serious money was from both acquisition from the land preservation side of the CPA and from the state and the Sudbury Valley trustees in the Concord Land Conservation Trust. This is the kind of money we couldn't put on the table. We actually put another $50,000 in to start the planning because we knew that it would take a long time for this to happen. And we just got the approval of the planned residential development permit for the new houses. So what have we learned? Know your players and know each other. I did something that somebody in housing hadn't done before. Concord has a monthly meeting of all the conservation and climate interests. And housing people hadn't gone to that before. And well, I kind of like conservation too. So I started going monthly. And I now know most of the people in the conservation community. And that, I think, combined with the previous agreement of the town that if the town's going to acquire it, they have to look at both housing and open space, makes it much easier to look at new projects. We don't have one cooking at the moment, but I don't know when open space will come on the market. Well, actually, I know the next big piece of open space we're going to get is a prison. If you know anybody who can reuse a maximum security prison in a creative way, let us know. As you can see, we did have we have a builder, we have a housing bank, the trust, we have an advocacy organization, and we have a housing authority. And in fact, those two little units I showed you are now housing authority units. So I'm just going to finish by saying the problem is still money. And I think there's an opportunity at the moment because in the governor's housing bill is a section that will permit towns and local option to collect fees of from 1/2 to 2% on the value of property sales over $1 million, the so-called transfer fee. The real estate organizations don't like it, except on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, where the new firemen live in Hyannis. Those real estate agents realize that we have to have more workforce housing. And frankly, let them live in Fitchburg is not an answer to sustainable workforce in our wealthy suburban communities. So I think with the trust, with the history of agreement, I would hope the next time we might get a few more units when this comes up. But the trust with the transfer fee money would be able to act without waiting for town meeting. And one of the things that always worries me is when something comes on the market, even if the town and the conservation and housing industry or advocates are willing to come up with the money, it takes town meeting before you can do it. And the developers may say, we'll take it right now. It's a little bit like buying a house without a mortgage or a home inspection, that cash talks. So I hope if we get future opportunities, we'll be able to use money in the trust, work with our conservation colleagues, and make other developments happen. But this one will happen. We wish we'd had 10 or 12 units. We've got 5. Thank you.
Okay, and now the landscape architect, Peter Flinker.
Thanks. I'm jumping into position because, of course, as a consultant, I'm going to talk about 4 different towns, but not as much detail, I promise. Where's the clicker? Oh, there it is. So this is the first one. This is a really interesting project in Norwell, Massachusetts called Donovan's Farm. This is actually kind of a legacy project for me. This is from 20 years ago, but it's a 175-acre farm, one of the last big pieces of land in Norwell. The town was freaking out when it was going to be sold, and so they decided we're going to buy it, and there was a willing landowner. And they went to town meeting. The town meeting said, all right, we'll go along with this, but the provision was we want some of it to be developed for housing, because we need housing even back then, and also to get some of the money back. And so they agreed and did purchase the property and then sponsored a master planning process to really look at the entire property. You can't see it all that well, but this is like the original master plan. There's wetlands that go through the property, a big area of forest. There's the farm up here. And what this represents is we actually developed a plan for a sort of a mixed density village on part of the site. And so in the end, 130 acres was preserved, including the big fields and the old farmstead. And then 40 acres was identified as the best part of the parcel to be developed because it wasn't really visible, it had the best soils, good access on the existing road, et cetera. And then we came up with a sort of preliminary master plan for that. And then the town put out an RFP to sell it to a developer. But first, they actually changed the zoning to allow for an open space subdivision, which wasn't possible in the town before that. And this is the result. We actually worked with the developer to sort of lay out something using everything we could think of based on traditional village planning models, right? So a narrow road with continuous sidewalks connecting to a system of trails in the surrounding open space, houses close to the road, parking to the extent possible hidden behind the units so that what you see from the road is sort of something that looks like any traditional historic town, especially after 20 years of growing in. Looks really good. But one of the key things was really paying attention to the separation of the public space along the street and the parks and the open spaces and the private space you have around houses. Because this is something that our traditional villages do very well. Only it used to just happen organically because people would live in a place for a long time and they would grow a hedge. They put up a fence because they didn't have to talk to their neighbor all the time. And they planted trees and those trees grew. So a big part of, I think, the struggle in doing any kind of housing is making something that feels like it fits into our historic cities and towns where you have this kind of richness in the old communities. And it's getting more of a challenge now, of course, with the price of all of this, which we'll talk about later. But the result is something which really feels like it could have been there for 100 years or more. It really fits into the community. And one of the things that made this work, I apologize, it's not quite that visible, but the town purchased the land from the willing landowner. They sponsored a master plan for conservation and development. They changed the zoning to allow for open space subdivision. Then they issued an RFP for a developer. Then the developer came in and did the final design, permitting, and construction. And then design was kind of fundamental to all of this, starting with the original master plan, really thinking about what's the best part of the site to be preserved and why, what's the function that it performs, and then what's the best part of the site to be developed, and then making the plan around that. This is another project in Wayland. It's called the Residences at 89 Oxbow, but this was an intentional affordable housing project sponsored by the town. And what was interesting is it was on the site of a former Nike missile base. One thing I never knew is that they built 12 of these missile bases surrounding Boston to counter the threat of Russian bombers coming in the 1950s. Of course, that pretty quickly became defunct with intercontinental missiles. So these were abandoned in the 1970s and then sat there for 30 years before the town came to an agreement with the feds to buy this piece of land, and they set aside about 11 acres for open space and then identified again through a master plan process the best part of the site for affordable housing. And then they put together an RFP for a developer to come in and then worked very closely with the developer, not just to design how the housing would fit into the site, but how to make it as affordable as possible. And then the town chipped in part of that funding as well. So it's got 11 units that meet 80% of adjusted, or area median income. 5 of the units are 100% area median income. It includes photovoltaics and an advanced septic system and low-impact site development techniques, to handle stormwater on site and so on. And really, again, a very high level of design for an affordable housing project. And it worked because, CPA funds were used originally to purchase and remediate the site. The town then sponsored a master plan again to determine the desired uses before the developer comes up and does their own plan. Then they issued an RFP for the developer, and they partnered with the developer to do the final design and the financing. And then the funding came from, again, CPA funding were used to help make it more affordable. There were state grants and then tax credits that the developer could take advantage of. And again, the design quality and the community amenities, which includes town ball field, which they built a few years ago, were really important to making this fit into the town, both physically and then also, of course, politically. This is a current project, which is master planned for 300-acre golf course in Stowe called Stowe Acres. And again, like all of these properties, it's threatened by large lot development, basically dividing the whole thing up. When the property was sold to a company that's specializes in continuing golf on improving golf courses, but also selling part of the golf courses typically for development. The town got very nervous. The local land trust stepped in very carefully, worked out a deal with the developer or the landowner to sort of put that plan on hold for 6 months while they did a master plan. And then they pulled together a team that included the developer, the town planning, conservation departments, a consultant, which was us, but also the landowner and the developer, which really made a big difference. First thing we did was really figure out, again, what's the most important part of the property to be preserved. And we developed this open space framework that set aside sort of the sensitive habitat along the rivers and streams, sort of connecting the large patches of forest with greenways to allow for the movement of plants and animals over time, preserving the wetlands and floodplains, of course, doing some reclamation of some of the key areas of the former golf course, which is underway, and then maintaining the scenic view from the roadside, which is really something that everyone in the town loves. And then through that process, sort of by inverse analysis, identified certain areas where you don't have any of those conservation values that were where we started when we started thinking about different development scenarios. So we did a whole bunch of different plans looking at each of these sites and eventually settled on this one area at the north as the best part for the development. So there's, I think, over 200 acres is going to remain as a golf course. The south course has a permanent conservation restriction now that was purchased by the town. The north course will remain in sort of short-term use as a golf course and then be converted to town recreation land. There's conservation land that's wrapping around this whole thing, a 2-mile trail loop that is under construction that links the whole thing together, and then about 30 acres of development, which is, again, going to be organized around the principles of a traditional village. So this is sort of the general plan for that. But it's, again, looking at how would you do this if you were laying out a walkable village 150 years ago, and how could we do this today? So it's a grid of relatively narrow streets, larger lots along the outside, smaller lots on the inside served by alleys instead of driveways, a cottage community at one end, and then connected and surrounded by open space. And then the developer's been working with an architect to develop a variety of different architectural styles that give it variety, but also meet different densities. So there's some duplexes, there's a small apartment house that'll be for seniors, there's cottages that are quite small, some larger houses on the outskirts. So it's basically, it'll have at least some of the social diversity and certainly the visual diversity that you have in a traditional village. And I think out of 189 units, 49 units are going to be affordable. So one of the things which makes this work again is putting together guidelines that really talk about how can we accommodate modern uses and demands for parking and car storage and access and so on with this traditional village. So a lot of attention to where do we put the parking? Can we have shared parking lots and side access to the garages rather than everybody with a garage out in the front? That just by itself totally transforms a community. And then for the smaller lots on the interior, we have sort of these narrow roads with on-street parking, beautiful front lawns and yards, and then all the access to the garages is on an alley in the rear. And we're seeing this more and more often around New England. And again, it's sort of looking at how people designed things many years ago. And the result is when you're on this beautiful new street, you don't see so many cars. What you see is people walking, your neighbors on their porches, all the things that make a more dense village setting livable. And then again, a real attention to how do we separate the public space from the private space. So even though you have a relatively small yard, you have a sense of that sort of transition from the private space of the house to the public space on the street. And again, that's something you find in every historic community, and there's a reason for that. It's because it makes something work. So in terms of how this worked mechanically, again, the key was a local land trust got involved and sort of informally approached the landowner and then more formally to get them to hold off on development. They included a team that included the land trust, the town planning conservation staff, the landowner, and the developer, and the consultants. They use CPA and grant funding to protect the open space. The owner will continue to run the golf course, only they got $1 million cash for a conservation restriction. The town is proceeding with a master plan for the north course, and the developer's in the middle of permitting for the village. So all of those are, pretty large parcels, and from my understanding, you don't have that many large parcels in Wellesley. So some of the lessons learned, as we've heard already, these partnerships are very important, creative financing and creative management of a project. But I wanted to point out some interesting work that's being done in Lexington recently. This is a project called Fairland Commons, which was done on a parcel that was assembled from, I think, 3 or 4 existing house lots in this part of town that has lots that extend far back from the street. And so they put these together to create a 3.5 acre development site. And then they permitted under the town's balanced housing bylaw. This is a very interesting bylaw that it works like a traditional open space subdivision or cluster, except this being the conventional plan, which allows for, 9 units. Instead of taking those 9 units and just putting them on a smaller part of the property to protect the open space, the balanced housing bylaw actually lets you take the square footage of these 9 units and divide it up into a greater number of smaller houses. So they actually let you multiply by 7,000 square feet per unit times 9, which is a lot of square footage, and then you can divide that up into any number of smaller houses that you want. So far, I think the observation has been very few people have gone to giant apartment buildings, partly because they only allow single-family houses, duplexes, and townhouses. So you can't do giant apartments, but you can do stuff like this, which is instead of 9 units, it's 14 units. Some of them are attached, they're smaller, and they're really organized, again, a traditional sort of village pattern. There's connections to town trail system that are going to be preserved going through the site, so it enhances sort of livability for the whole neighborhood. And then the design itself, again, is built along traditional village planning principles where all the access and parking is behind the buildings with rear garages, and that allows you to have a wonderful sort of central open space, using principles that are being tested more often in co-housing and cottage communities, which you've seen, like the river, what's the one in West Concord?
Oh, Aspet River?
The one along the cottage community?
Concord Green?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're becoming more common, and people are starting to say, yeah, we'd love to live in a place like this, even though we don't have a giant lot and a giant house. The last thing I'll leave you with is, this is some studies that we did as part of the update they did in Lexington last year to their, basically their, what they call special permit residential development bylaw, which has 3 different sort of subsections, one of which is the balanced housing bylaw, which focuses on creation of housing. There's a sensitive sites bylaw that focuses on the open space. And there's another one called community benefits, which focuses on things like affordability. And for each of this, they allow you to take sort of the standard development density, in this case, a parcel of 3 acres with 7 lots, and reorganize that in different ways. And this again was a test to see how could we make multifamily housing fit into a traditional single-family neighborhood. So in this case, it's like maintaining the wide lawns and yards and trees along the street. It's building the multifamily that looks like a large single-family house, which are often, of course, 5,000 to 6,000 square feet, but then divided up into multiple units, or dividing it up into smaller cottages. But again, going from 7 lots to 15 makes a huge difference in terms of affordability, whether or not you add the subsidized affordable to it, or it's just market rate, more affordable than the large lots. And the last one, this is quite a small property, I think just 1.5 acres that could be divided up into 3 under the conventional plan. And again, some experiments of how can we divide that up and have multifamily that's designed in this case, to look like a traditional colonial building with a barn on the back, parking tucked in, and then open space preserved around the front and the side. And again, looking at a cottage model for that. So again, I think this kind of flexible development approach is something which, even if you have lots of just a couple of acres, you can really make effective use and create open space while you're doing the housing. You do have to limit your ambitions in terms of open space, right? You're not going to create a giant public park or a big conservation area, but you can carve out certainly nice public areas for people who live in this development, but also some shared space that might be used by the community, a pocket park or a small area of forest. But the trick, of course, is getting there and getting an understanding of these sites before the developer has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars doing their plan and bringing it forward, because then it's too late. So one of the things we can talk about in a few minutes is how you integrate that into the planning process. You didn't give me the hook. That was kind of you.
So now we're going to hear from three responders. The first is Michael Tobin, who's the president of the Wellesley Conservation Lands Trust and has been so for the last 4 years. And he's been on the board since 2015. Michael was a grassroots leader in the Save the North 40 campaign and the town of Wellesley's acquisition of the North 40 property. He enjoys growing garlic at his community garden at the North 40, and he's been a town meeting member since 2015. In his other side of his life, he's vice president and head of technology at Dyne Therapeutics in Waltham. He has an electric engineering degree from Syracuse and an MBA from Cornell. The second responder will be Deed McCollum. Deed McCollum and Anmar Alonza co-founded Building a Better Wellesley in 2019, and they currently serve as the co-chairs of that organization. Its goal is to be a positive voice and to advocate for affordable, attainable, and increased housing choices in Wellesley. Deed's been a member of the Wellesley Advisory Committee and is currently a town meeting member. She plays an active role in the Wellesley Housing Task Force, the Wellesley Civil Discourse Initiative, and is a member of the Board of Trustees of the World of Wellesley, an NPO dedicated to making Wellesley an inclusive community for all. Last but not least is our current planning director, Eric Arbeen, who's been planning director for the town of Wellesley since November 2022. Prior to that, he was the principal comprehensive planner for Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District, and prior to that, as a senior community planner at Old Colony Planning Council. He's has a bachelor and a master's of public administration from Bridgewater State University and is certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. So welcome to the responders, and the first off will be Michael.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, all the presenters, for your great perspectives. I'm going to try to directly relate some of those to Wellesley's opportunity here. Now, attendees, for a moment here, I want to invite each of you to think about, why did you choose to live in Wellesley? What I continue to hear from recent residents is that it's some combination of three reasons: proximity to Boston, quality of schools, and all our green and natural spaces. So of course, here we are tonight to talk about how we continue to create new housing where anyone can afford to live in Wellesley and protect those wild spaces. One issue is that so much of the green space you think about is not actually protected in perpetuity. Look at this open space map. Only areas that are in dark green, dark purple, and some of the dark brown parcels. So here's some dark purples. It's hard to see the dark greens. And the dark browns over here, for instance, are the only places on this map where the land is actually protected as open space in perpetuity. Most of the spaces we think about in our neighborhoods, Wellesley College, Babson College, Mass Bay College, Wellesley Country Club, and many more in private residences can be sold. When the North 40 was put on the market to the highest bidder by Wellesley College in 2014, residents cried out, "How could this happen?" When 12 acres with one house at 135 Great Plain Avenue was sold and most of the lot was clear-cut, residents asked, "How could this happen?" All of the property on this map, not in those dark colors, can be sold next week or next decade. And so our mission at the Land Trust, for a brief background, was some concerned residents in 1958 saw open spaces rapidly lost to post-war development, and they created the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust. This was before the town's Natural Resource Commission was created in 1980, and the Land Trust had received donations and permanently protected dozens of acres in Wellesley and bordering lands. Today, the mission continues to be protect and maintain open space and educate youth and interest adults in these matters of conservation. Now, a disclaimer. I will be mentioning a number of recent projects in Wellesley and other properties this evening. I want to let you know that I'm not passing judgment, good or bad, on any of these, and only mean to bring some facts to the point of this discussion. Additionally, some possible and hypothetical examples I give are nothing more to think about than possibilities, and I'm not asking for comment on any one particular property, but getting us to think about this topic holistically so we can come up with some options to take some action. Through zoning changes, through collaboration across organizations, we can explore through funding options, how can we in Wellesley do this in a proactive way? So just some reminders of some recent examples at 148 Weston Road, the Bristol. It's this area here in the middle. This property, while Wellesley was still under the 40B limit, next to the North 40 here, was completely clear-cut of trees. And as it now looks, very much like this artist's drawing at the time, some very dense housing, but some very dense housing. 100 Linden Street, Terraza. This area here and this parcel here, as we're all familiar, across from Talby Lot, right near the center of town. Also, a few parcels put together. Every tree was removed during this construction project, and today, either finished or nearly finished, is the property we see, very dense housing today. What I've already mentioned, the 12 acres at 135 Great Plain Avenue, Fieldstone Way. This is the property here. This was while under construction. There are some wetlands here, and there's a 100-foot buffer zone to those wetlands that was protected, and otherwise mostly completely cleared with a little bit of extra open space down here in this corner, and these houses now built and occupied. This was going to be the first parcel that followed the Natural Resources Protection Development Bylaw, if I got that correct, which was put in place, which had the opportunity to actually take this 12 acres, more densely populate half of it, and permanently protect the back half of it in perpetuity. But while we were still under the 40B limit, this was what was developed instead. Now, at the other extremes, the Nines, this is the Nines buildings. Down here, what you see listed in green is the Charles River, and what's listed in green is wetlands. And so here we have, I think, 350 built, up to 800 permitted or possible. 850, even better, with no further destruction of any of these green spaces. This is complete redevelopment of existing developed land. So over the last year, the 125 Oakland Street, Sisters of Charity property has been in the news. And we can see the parcel here, 14 acres abutting the Centennial Reservation, the town forest land here, and Oakland Street, Mass Bay College over here. And so this property, as the owners have said, will be sold. And so what had been one thing that could be possible, and the Land Trust had proposed, is that take the existing buildings and parking lots here in the center oval, approximately half of the parcel, and let's at some point redevelop that, for instance, as an example. And then these buffer areas in the corner along the road, there is a little bit of wetlands here, buffer to the Centennial Reservation. Let's permanently protect those, because by right, someone could come in and build single-family homes, for instance, across this entire location. Let me bring to your attention 828 Washington Street, the Cheever House, formerly the Wellesley College Center for Women, was housed here. This property across from Wellesley College is in actually two parcels. There's one historic house in the front, and then behind the aqueduct, there's some property, 21 acres overall. In 2014, the college did say they planned to sell this after they had sold the North 40. Nothing has moved forward yet, but what could happen if this was sold? There is a significant amount of wetlands over here on this side, but you've got 12 acres here. Imagine what could be in that location. And so we need to think about whether it's this example or many others. You saw how little is actually protected in Wellesley, and so it's 200 Pond Road. Where did those 8 acres come from? These properties with significant acreage are available to be sold. So it's up to us to take the opportunity to use the tools we have here, the collaboration among us, a number of funding tools. CPC has been mentioned. The town, and we're going to hear from Eric in a moment, is the strategic housing plan for all of us to get involved in what could be. At the same time, other organizations like the NRC and open space plans, let's do these in a collaborative fashion so we can work together on them. And then the Land Trust, as you've heard, also brings some tools. We can act quickly. While we don't have a lot of cash on hand, we can raise grants, we can raise funds, and we can go to organizations like the Conservation Lending Fund, the national organization, to quickly acquire funds to help meet an owner's needs, and then gets the time necessary for the town organizations to work together and collaborate. So in summary, I feel that with all the organizations represented here, in person and on Zoom, concerned citizens, I'm really optimistic that we can continue this conversation and really take positive actions from here. Thank you.
And next will be Deed from Building a Better Wellesley.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all. My slides aren't nearly as pretty as everybody else's, just saying. Just a quick introduction. Well, thank you for the Wellesley Land Trust for this opportunity to discuss what we've heard from the community, from town meeting members, public forums, planning meetings, the importance of land use in our town for collective well-being. Land use allows us to address our climate and housing needs, to support thriving local networks of services and amenities, and to build community, to promote appreciation and protection of our outdoor spaces. Building a Better Wellesley was started in 2019 by really interested volunteers who had learned a lot from The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein's book about housing segregation, in combination with the Massachusetts housing crisis. We understood that housing, the history of zoning, local preference was complicated, and we wanted to form Building a Better Wellesley to provide information, learning opportunities to the community, and to strive to be that positive and thoughtful voice for housing development. We hear a lot from the opposition. You don't hear so much as to why housing maybe is important. Just some general background, and then I'll comment to the presenters. Housing in Massachusetts, we have the highest housing prices in the country. We have the highest rental prices, and we have the lowest vacancy rate. To address the housing needs, CHAPA has identified we need 200,000 units by 2030. That means 25,000 a year need to be built. Housing and rental prices have been a driving force in driving young people, 25 to 44, out of Massachusetts, identifying that leaving Massachusetts is not considered an option if they want to buy, they want to raise a family, or they want to rent, because incomes are not keeping pace with the housing price. I don't know. I'm going to... Or not. I'm going to keep, oh, okay. Oh, well, I went too far.
The other arrow. There you go.
Oh, okay. So here's some Wellesley statistics, that 83% of our homes are single-family homes, are single-family homes, and they're owner-occupied. Over 50% of those single-family homes have 4 to 5 bedrooms, which means young people wanting less bedrooms or people wanting to downsize are not particularly attracted to those large houses, and that the median sales price is over $2 million. Our workforce, 87% of employees live elsewhere. And if you look at the statistics in terms of their wages, they come up, the majority come up at like 60% of AMI, which isn't going to allow them to buy a house in Wellesley. Why do we care about housing? Housing allows for economic racial diversity, provides downsizing. It allows the workforce to become residents, to maintain family support networks if you have somebody who needs care, allows household individuals to downsize, to stay in their community, and provides young families the opportunity to move to Wellesley. Our schools are losing enrollment. Any town meeting member has heard that, heard the debate. And if we can't have young families moving to Wellesley, then our school enrollment is likely to decline. Also, if you add houses, you add tax revenue. So for people who are like, no, we don't want more housing, you have actually a revenue stream that helps to maintain our services and amenities. So, reasons to collaborate, as these gentlemen have explained, there's a lot of opportunities. Land, you can't grow land. Land is not going to multiply on its own. Our land is a fixed set, which we can then negotiate for housing or open space or any other services that you want. And so identifying how we want to use our land for the benefit of our community is really important. Multifamily myths, I mean, you hear about traffic, and we've heard traffic repeatedly in this town as a barrier to building. And I just want to ask if anybody going to the dump has ever seen a car pull out of Great Plain Avenue. I have not. I mean, I'm always looking for it. I'm like, I'm going to use that as an example. You don't see people coming and going out of Great Plain Avenue. There were things that could have been done better with that Michael alluded to, but that's the collaboration piece. If you see opportunities and being able to carve out open space or identify what you want as open space and identify what you want for affordable housing or more housing or smaller housing to allow more housing choice, that's a win-win situation. And I love the maps that you all showed about, well, you could do single family and here's what it looks like. And it eats up every possible piece of property and is not allowing people access. So if you can do smaller, you can do denser, you can plan it, you're going to have greater opportunity. So providing opportunities, working together, we can preserve and share open space. Also, if you do denser, you relieve the pressure to develop open space, right? We have limited open space. We're not growing land. So if you could do denser or more or smaller, you can preserve more of that open space. If you do it near our commercial districts, you increase foot traffic, and that benefits our businesses. And the number of employees who are commuting to and from Wellesley would be reduced. And that helps our climate goals. And I already talked about declining enrollment. And we also, we're reducing carbon emissions, and we address environmental justice and housing, because there's a lot of people, and Mark had identified that building affordable housing near conservation area actually addressed equity issues, because those are always the most expensive properties. And if you look at environmental problems, land, whatever, you can guarantee, the demographics are guaranteed to be 95% Black. So if you're addressing racial equity, you might also want to do that. And I have 3 minutes left. So I just want to say Wellesley has demonstrated the will to begin addressing the housing crisis. We passed ADUs, we expanded inclusionary zoning, we approved the MBTA communities, and housing development is still viewed with skepticism about changes versus opportunity for people to call Wellesley home. And I hope that this forum, thank you, Michael, Judy, helps people think outside of the box, not silos, but think about our community as a whole and how we build that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. And now we'll hear from the Planning Director from Wellesley, Eric Arbeen.
As you can see, I don't have a slideshow. So I'm just going to talk a little bit tonight. As Heather said, my name's Eric Arbini. I'm the Planning Director, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And I think it goes to 8:30. We're at 8:15, 8:16-ish, so I'll try to make my remarks brief. I know people have questions and whatnot. So as you know, Wellesley is like some of the other communities we've talked about here tonight. It's a small town, 10 square miles, and is largely built out. Although there are pockets of open space, they're owned as Michael said, Babson, Wellesley, Mass Bay, the Country Club, the Conservation Land Trust. Those are, except the colleges, and they're able to be developed. He is right. He's not wrong. It seems unlikely, but the North 40 was probably unlikely too. But it was $35 million for 46 acres 10 years ago. I shudder to think it would be in this market 10 years later. So one evidence of Wellesley's built-out status is the town hasn't had a subdivision in about 15 years. Most other towns, these towns we've spoke about, some have had subdivisions and they're on the regular. Here, 15 years ago, it was for 7 units. So there's not a lot of land. It pops up on occasion, undeveloped land, but it can happen. Most people are aware that development now in town happens on single-family lots, they take down an older house, build a much larger house. Or it's in the form of redevelopment, as we saw with Terraza or the Nines. There was something there, and they're taking it down and putting something in its place. And what's governed land use here in town, and it can be kind of boring and confusing and complex, it's the zoning bylaw. So we have 20-some-odd districts here in town, 8 overlay districts that govern how land is used in town. And the zoning bylaws can be changed. We change them at town meeting. We just amended zoning to allow for MBTA community zoning. So the zoning bylaw has purposes. One of the purposes to encourage housing for all persons of all income levels, to facilitate the adequate provision of open space, conservation of natural resources. It's like, how do we do all this at the same time? That's the challenge when you go to town meeting and to get everybody here, and that's why we're here tonight. It's something that's it's not easy, but nothing worthwhile is usually easy. So having us here tonight, hopefully will kick off conversations. The town does have some. We do have the natural resource protection development, as Michael noted. It hasn't been used yet, but it's a cluster-type bylaw, or it would preserve 50% of the open space on a particular property. A lot of our residential zoning districts require open space. It might not be conserved open space in perpetuity, but it's open areas, as Peter was talking about, and landscaping, yards, that sort of thing. As Dee going last, I'm kind of hitting some of the points that have already been made. So town recently adopted accessory dwelling units, and we adopted zoning to comply with the MBTA community mandate, and that allows up to 17 units an acre to be built within a half mile of the train station in commercial areas. So denser housing, transit-oriented development, smart growth. You've probably heard it before, but focusing development near areas that are already developed, not in green spaces or green fields. The town does have resources. We have the Wellesley Housing Development Corporation, whose mission is to sponsor and assist in the development of affordable housing opportunities. We have the Community Preservation Act here in town, which monies go for affordable housing. They go for open space, historic preservation, and we go to town meeting, and there's usually a project or two each year looking for funds. In addition, the town has a number of plans. I'm going to talk about one a little later, the strategic housing plan, but we have a master plan that helps guide the town. And these are all public plans where the public's invited. We have an open space and recreation plan. The Natural Resources Commission is developing an RFP for a land preservation plan to help identify parcels of interest, kind of what we're speaking about tonight. The plan will also involve a funding mechanism. And what I'd like to talk about a few minutes tonight is the strategic housing plan. 2018, the town adopted a housing production plan. And the idea of that plan was to get the town over that 10% Chapter 40B mandate everyone talked about. We were under the 10%, and developers can come in and they can override local zoning. Once you get over that 10%, you have the ability to deny these 40B projects. You can, unless they're friendly to the town. If it's a project that the town likes, they can obviously move forward with it. But the housing production plan it's a pretty rigid document. It focuses on that. It needs state approval, and the idea is to get the town over 10%. Now that the town's over 10%, we said, why not look at something a little, let's broaden our horizons, not just look at affordable housing, but let's look at housing in general. So at the 2023 special town meeting members approved the use of $65,000 in CPA funds. So CPA going towards housing, $10,000 from the Wellesley Housing Development Corporation, and we did an RFP process this past spring and hired Barrett Planning Group, headed by Judy Barrett. So we got the Housing Task Force in place. It's made up of a number of folks here in town, some planning board members, select board members. So What we're looking to do, this new plan seeks to identify new strategies, policies, and actions to create housing for individuals and families of all socioeconomic levels, housing types. We're looking where this housing should be. We'll look at, sorry, I lost my place there. And how it interacts with the MBTA communities law, and also part of it, we'll be looking at, one of the aspects of it, we'll be looking at how it reflects open space. So, we're looking at everything here. So on behalf of the Housing Task Force, I'm inviting you all here tonight and watching at home to attend the first public meeting of the Strategic Housing Plan process. It'll be held on Tuesday, June 18th at 6:30 p.m. at the high school cafeteria. We'll have promotion, if you're looking to write something down, we'll have promotional materials on the town website soon, and it'll be broadcast. Again, this is a plan that looks at housing across town, at all different types of housing, not just affordable housing, but where should this housing be? What kind of housing should we have? And the most important aspect, or the most important part of it, is you, are the residents. It's not my plan. It's the town's plan. It doesn't belong to me. I don't live here in Wellesley. I shepherd a number of projects through here, but I'm here I'm the planning board's main staff person. So we'll shepherd it through, but it's not my plan. So I hope to see everybody there. It should be quite a process, and there'll be additional times for public outreach as well. So, a few items I wanted to respond to. One of the things we've heard tonight, and these great projects that were mentioned by Peter, by Mark, and Frank. I'm learning my new friends' names quickly. But they all had great ideas, great projects. So some of the themes there, money. You need money to do this, and especially money here in Wellesley. We see on the regular houses come through, getting torn down at $1.3, $1.4 million for a quarter-acre lot for someone to knock it down and build something bigger. So 8-9 acres is a lot of money. Also, there's also when you want to preserve land, there's also, the trade-off is denser housing. So you saw, we'll preserve these 80 acres, but we're gonna kind of squeeze the houses into a smaller lot, which is, some of the trade-offs that we've seen on these projects. These were mostly larger lots that they were talking about. Wellesley's, there's not too many large lots, but something could pop up, as Michael was saying, that the town, would have to make a decision on, and again, goes back to town meeting, which is not the most nimble. It's not a mayor, it's not a city council. We can vote next week or 2 weeks from now, so sometimes you have to wait 6 months. Obviously, you can call a special town meeting. So there are some challenges to make this happen, but again, anything worthwhile is hard, and it's usually worth it. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll open the floor up for questions. I'm wondering, can we use these mics to pass around to the speakers so people don't have to pop up and down all the time? Okay, who has got a question? Yes, in the back?
Closer.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentations tonight. I'm Ronnie Elwee. I'm a member of Wellesley's Advisory Committee. What I really was struck by, the wonderful conversations that you had about your planning projects, is that apart from cars and parking cars, you didn't talk a lot about other forms of transportation. And so I'm wondering, how much did transportation play into your plans? How little did it play in? How much did it play in? And did the role of transportation or not allow you to do the kind of work that you wanted to do?
That's a good question. And I think, as you saw, most of these projects are not on transit. They're, especially, I think by definition, because they involved conservation as well as housing, they're in areas where conservation is seen as a need and worth doing. I think there's been a huge amount of really interesting transit-oriented development work done in the last 10 and 20 years, but most of it doesn't involve open space preservation. I mean, for us, what's really exciting is sort of the rediscovery, as I said, of the sort of village and town and urban planning principles, which sort of by definition, a good urban place incorporates open space into our daily lives, right? You walk right outside your house, you walk down a beautiful sidewalk under the trees to a beautiful public park, and it's just part of your existence. You don't have to get in the car and go there. So that's the gold standard. But we're dealing with projects as they come along, and you don't always get that choice.
Thank you.
One of the reasons we wanted more units at Assabet Bluff is because it's walkable to the MBTA station. The other thing I will say about housing advocacy is we don't advocate for everything. We had two 40B projects come up because we lost a sizable project that brought us under 10%. One of them is, from my point of view, almost perfect. It's replacing a parking lot on the edge of an office park. It will be, when we get a bridge over the Assabet River, walkable to West Concord and to the train station, and it's going to be geothermally heated and cooled. So that's a win-win. We got another one, and we said, we don't think this is a good idea. We want more housing. But we don't want it 2.5 miles from town where it's a half-mile walk to the stores and absolutely everybody will have to drive. It also has much more conservation impact than the project that we advocated. So I think occasionally housing interests ought to say, yes, we want housing, but maybe not here. And now the opportunity will be MBTA zoning. Our planning board was, in my view, conservative. They've included a lot of areas that already have multifamily housing, but some of it is not developed for multifamily housing. And the good news is they're pressing for 20% affordability even there. So that's a place where you have to keep pressing to keep the affordability as high as you can, because we know what the market rate units are going to go for.
I appreciate that question. I was remiss not to bring it up when I was presenting. There's a lot of details which I had to skip over. But honestly, accessibility to transportation and just location of properties came up when we as a land trust started talking about the housing groups and learning what their interests are. And they were very different, depending on the density of housing, what type of housing they wanted to develop. Many of them did want to be as close to town center as they can. If it was on a transportation route, that was very important. So again, it was part of that learning process and kind of merging sectors. We looked out, the 385 Grand Green property is walkable to downtown East Hampton. It's a pretty far walk. Interestingly enough, though, it's just about on the town boundary with the town of Southampton, and there is a commercial area right there that's very walkable that includes a supermarket and includes an urgent care clinic. So that was a really big selling point. We are also talking about petitioning the local bus service to add a stop at the new neighborhood. And it's a little more aspirational, but there is a bike path not too far to the south of it. So it would take a lot of money, kind of more roads kind of being improved and road crossings, but it could absolutely be linked up to, and there's a pretty big bike to school program in the city of East Hampton. So yeah, transportation played a big role.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes, sir, in front.
Hi, I'm Jay Prasnitz. I'm on advisory committee too. We're going to be using a lot of cars for a while in the communities you describe. And there's housing, there's land, and there's open space. And I don't think most of us value open space parking lots that much. And I'm just wondering, on a state or local level, is there any discussion about how to creatively incent parking underground?
Well, I can only speak for Concord. There is a essentially underground parking in the new 40B that I described. We had an interesting fight, though, 3 years ago because the zoning board wanted to rezone what is essentially an enormous parking lot that was originally thought to serve the train station but isn't fully utilized. And we got a lot of pushback, and ultimately it failed because it did include a grocery store, which was the only one in town. So, I mean, we are replacing a parking lot with the 40B project that I identified, but we have people who are afraid of losing the retail space that goes with the parking, and we lost that fight.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lucienne Ronco, also on advisory. I guess we ask a lot of questions. My question is, there's a myth that I've heard, and maybe it's not a myth, and I'm asking you to speak to what your experience has been, is that when you bring in this higher density housing, that the values of houses in the surrounding area may drop. And I wonder what your actual experience has been as you bring in the higher density housing, where you've done the preservation of areas around it. What's the impact to surrounding house values?
Has anyone ever seen housing value drop anywhere? Doesn't really happen.
Massachusetts, for sure.
I mean, it's it's hard to imagine. With all the requirements on any kind of housing now, in terms of quality, code requirements, energy requirements, everything else that towns put on there, it's all, anything new, no matter what the density, is guaranteed to be better quality than a lot of the existing housing stock in almost any town. I'm sure Wellesley has higher than average. So I think that is a myth, and it's wrong.
Okay, there's a question in the back.
Someone has a different opinion, or maybe observation?
Thank you so much for your presentation. I am a town meeting member, and I am for Precinct D. And Precinct D happened to be have a big area along Route 9. So my house is already in a very dense area. And I moved here from Waltham. I have a beautiful house there. And when talk about more housing for Bentley College started happening, that they needed more units for the students to live in and all, they come up with this beautiful plan to preserve some areas that are historical and develop others. And as it happened, my beautiful home ended up right across from the building. Before, where I had seen trees and open land, I could now see across the road a big building full of apartments. And indeed, my property did went down, way, way down. So I moved to Wellesley, feeling I will be more secure. I put all my savings here. And the same thing is happening. A daycare was just built recently there, and my neighbors had talked about moving. And if they move, it's quite possible the apartments will be built there again. So I think it's no a myth. It is definitely no a myth. In this game, there are winners and losers. And if you happen to be on the winning side, your property will be fine. But if you are not, there definitely will be lower and less desirable places to live. And as a result, your property will go down because no one wants to live across from an apartment. Building is no prejudice, but people come and go at all times of the day. Police get called often to solve problems that we don't know what they are. And so the schools becomes less desirable, and it creates inequality in our communities. It creates a good part of town and a very bad part of town. And it's happening here, that we have schools that are brand new, where people are happy to send their kids, and there are others that don't have air conditioning, completely run down. People don't want to move to that area. So the houses are less desirable in that area of Wellesley. And I'm talking Wellesley Hills. I live in Wellesley Hills. I don't live in any obscure area. So thank you for listening, but please do bear in mind that these changes do have unintended consequences, and it do affect more people who are just at the margins, that the ones that are, well-seated and have more power, have more resources to advocate for their land, not to be the one where they are building the apartments. Thank you.
I think I would say there are apartments and there are apartments. I can show you houses in Concord that are across the street from sizable condominium or apartment complexes that are no more than 3 stories, and believe me, they sell for lots of money. It's a historic district, sure. I mean, I want to defer a bit to Peter because he's seen more of these, but not everything is Ringe Towers. I don't know what the project you're describing is like, but you can do density without necessarily affecting the livability of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Yes, Raina.
Hi, I'm Raina McManus. I'm a town meeting member. Thank you so much for tonight. I have a question. One of the projects that you had shown was 100% affordable units, and I was wondering how that was accomplished.
Sure. So that was my project in East Hampton, or I should say my project. Yes, so that East Hampton is still a 40B community, so that's the first thing about it. So those houses, those apartments in those 3 buildings, will be taking advantage of tax credits, for their construction and their subsidized rents, I would imagine. I haven't gotten too much into the background of that. We did honestly, it was another interesting part of the process for me as I was learning more about affordable housing. We did try to get also owner-occupied affordable housing as well as apartments. We could not get it to work economically. I mean, we really needed the resources that, the rental apartment units really brought, kind of from federal and state credits. The developer for the owner-occupied units was wonderful. He tried really hard. It just didn't pencil out economically. So being able to take advantage of those tax credits for rental units really brought a substantial sum of money. And you need to, from my understanding, the sweet spot starts at around 20 units for that to start making it really work, but really kind of hitting around the 30 units, really makes it economical at that point. But again, I think the wonderful thing, I consider owner-occupied affordable housing, I've heard is kind of the gold standard because it allows people to build equity in their houses. But at the same time, we need the rentals too in that community. So, we think it's a wonderful outcome.
Yeah, the 5 units I described are all affordable, but basically the town has underwritten that. And the problem is that, just as has been said, there aren't programs that work well. The financial engineering is too complicated to make it work for 2 or 3 units. So what we're doing basically is providing the land and probably some construction subsidy for the new houses that are going to be built. They may be built by Habitat. We've done at least one project where we saved an older house. Habitat rebuilt it. It's now 2 affordable units. But the financial engineering that makes large-scale affordable housing work doesn't work on the 2 and 3 unit level, and you're going to wind up having to subsidize it locally, I think.
Somebody pointed out to me there's a wonderful Spotlight series the Globe did in December about the price of housing, and one of the key articles is called, I think it's the $600,000 problem, with $600,000 being the average cost of building a unit of housing, even in these ugly apartments. If you're trying to build a lovely little cottage, it sort of starts there, it goes up. So I think that the successful affordable housing, basically it's huge subsidies that are assembled from every different direction. Towns can play a huge role by providing the land, which there was one affordable housing project I showed in Wayland, where the town bought the land from the feds using CPA funding. And the way it was affordable is they basically provided the land, and the developer put together the package that included tax credits, but also they put CPA funding into just a subsidy to make it more affordable. So there's no easy way to do it. You just have to be willing to subsidize it.
Okay, I'm told that we have time for one more question, and I see someone standing. Yes.
Hi, I'm Herb Nolan. I'm not a town meeting member, and I'm not on the select board, so I'm one of the few people who's not. I am really I really love that you're having this gathering tonight to talk about the relationship between dense housing development and open space. They are connected. I think true environmentalism is to create density where it's needed most, close to transit, and preserve open space. They go hand in glove. And so bravo to you all for bringing us together for that. Just on the MBTA overlay district, Eric, which you talked about, it's a half a mile from the transit. I get that. You can walk a half a mile. You can get there. There ought to be young families and smaller units there. But it only applies to commercial land, as I understand. And it's not an overlay district. Yeah. But in the spirit of that, the town owns a lot of land which we decided to protect, or at least purchase years ago. And I note that a half a mile comes just short of our garden plot, and Michael's garden plot. Is the town considering, or would the town consider some limited development there in the nature that you all have talked about, half a mile from transit, walking distance to the commercial area? Is that under discussion, or should it be under discussion?
Sorry. That's a good question. That's a bigger question. I know half that land needs to be protected as open space. It was bought with CPA funds. The rest of the site and which parts are preserved or protected, that's a bigger discussion that would, I assume, involve many, many stakeholders and quite a planning process. That's what I'll say about that. I don't know if anybody wants to add to it.
Well, I would say that's the opportunity, right, to bring people, different stakeholders together to see if there's an opportunity on the North 40.
Just as a strategic housing plan, please get involved. This is our chance to speak up into what this community values.
Okay, I think we'll leave that where it is. A nice way of ending. If you have other questions that we didn't get to, you have a few minutes where you can come and talk to the panelists. I know we'll be kicked out of here at 9 sharp, so thank you very much for coming.
And I'd like to... And I'd like to thank all the panelists. It's been a group effort, and thank you very much.